Well, hello, everyone in the Committed 100. Back again. Action-packed Friday with Daylight and Systematic Theology and now Church History. On tonight is going to be Nightlight with Dr. Howard and others. But we're back in Church History and looking at the journey that the Church has taken. Now looking at some 320 years post the ascension of Christ, to decisions the church had made, whether good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, and how we get a lot of our traditions, a lot of our different opinions on church polity, on the nature of the church from this very early time. Once again, as a recap, we're looking at the time of the Arian heresy. From very early on in the church, pre-Nicaea, 325, until the end of the 5th century, we see a couple of centuries of arguments and fights in which, as we looked at, some of the early church fathers says that the world woke up to see itself Arian. That many churches were taken over by Arian philosophy and theology, that the person and work of Christ was marred and changed in and through their theology and attitudes. Specifically looking at the Council of Chalcedon, one of many councils that occurred during this period in time, in which helped to solidify the what we'd call orthodox or accepted doctrine of the Trinity and of the person and work of Christ. We've looked at the first 18 canons or decrees from the church. Now we're going to be looking at the final 10, 21, or 11, the final 19 through 30 of the canons, and its effect then on theology, the structure, the ecclesiology of the church, and then on into history. Those that do not look at history or study history and learn its lessons are doomed to repeat it. And in many ways we have, as we will discuss as we continue to go through these canons. But with that, looking at the Council of Chalcedon in 451 and Canon 19, whereas it has come to our ears that the providence of the canonical synods of the bishops are not held, and that on this account many ecclesiastical matters which needed reformation are neglected. Therefore, according to the canons of the Holy Fathers, the Holy Synod declares that the bishops of every province shall twice in the year assemble together with the bishop of the metropolis, shall approve, and shall settle whatever matters may have arisen. And bishops who do not attend, but remain in their own cities, though they are in good health and free from any unavoidable and necessary business, shall receive a brotherly admonition. So what's happening? Churches are not gathering together and banding together at this time to talk about the issues of the church. And so because of this, arises a lot of issues, whether it's issues with the membership or issues with social issues. They're not having this discussion. And so they wisely said, hey, at least meet twice a year. As the bishops of the church, as the leaders of the church, at least get together to discuss these things at least twice a year, to take care of these issues before they get worse. Now, with today's modern technology, we can have these meetings not a problem. In fact, just recently, the association that I'm in had our annual meeting at several satellite locations, and everybody zoomed in to have a meeting between Nebraska, Colorado, western South Dakota, Wyoming. We had several satellite locations, and we gathered together to discuss the issues of the church. With our modern technology, it's a lot different than, you're taking, let's say, a geographical area such as Asia Minor and making the bishops or the pastors travel hundreds of miles by horse or by camel or any other mode of transportation to attend these twice a year. There's a lot more involved in it than today, the convenience of technology. Now, you notice here that if they're unable to attend and they're not doing so for any good reason, that they receive an admonition, that they fit it into their schedule. How difficult is it for us to tune in to the Committed 100 daily? Even if it's just, this last lesson on systematic theology was right about a half hour. Which one of us doesn't have a half hour? Or Dr. Howard's lectures this week, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, on bibliology. Which one of us doesn't have an hour? Now, and not catching it necessarily at the time that it's being live streamed, but later on that day. Or sometimes, for me, I will set aside time in a day to catch up on the last couple of days worth of episodes, to set aside a playlist of things to listen to and to consider. That's on the individual level. But here in the churches, I get together with the pastor of the EFCA church in the next town over from me at least every other week and talk about the things of the church. And there's a hole in my lip. You guys didn't see that. That didn't happen. Canon number 20. It shall not be lawful, as we have already decreed, for clergymen officiating in one church to be appointed the church of another city. But they shall cleave to that which they were first thought worthy to minister, those, however, being accepted, who have been driven by necessity from their own country, and have therefore removed to another church. And if after this decree any bishop shall receive a clergyman belonging to another bishop, it is decreed that both shall be received, and the receiver shall be excommunicated until such a time as the clergyman who has removed shall have returned to his own church. One thing we must remember, looking back at the church history, within church history, the pastors of churches, the deacons, and the elders of churches were those that were raised up from within. Not this modern system we have, especially in America, of, let's say you've gone to seminary, you get out of seminary, and if there's not a position open at your home church, if you have a home church, you then send your resume far and wide to be called by another church. And that's a modern innovation. That is a modern understanding of what the church didn't do even as late as the 5th century. Now, they did give reasons and said, what, if someone's expelled from their home country and they're a pastor and they're looking to pastor again, let them do that. But if you've been raised up in a church, stay there. You don't have any rights or ability to pastor or to lead at another church. You're there. That's yours. But then again, so much has changed since this. The modern rise of congregational-led churches, board-led churches, to where the dismissal and censure of pastors is easy. You can have one board meeting and your pastor's gone, who has maybe labored there at the church for 20, 30, 40 years. The average pastor, senior pastor, is in a church for 2 years. Those that are in charge of youth ministries or worship ministry, 18 months. Depending on the denomination and their polity structure. And yet here, the concept from the very beginning is that once they're raised up within the church, they're there. They're not going to be bouncing from church to church. But it is the doctrines of men, the the changing of God's plan to something different that has arisen, that has caused myself included to be dismissed from churches because of an unwillingness to either abide by what God has said or to be, as Pastor X and Dr. H said earlier, to be patient for God's will, to wait out his times of pruning, to wait out the trials of life. Canon number 21. Clergymen and laymen bringing charges against bishops or clergymen are not to be received loosely or without examination as accusers, but their own character shall be first investigated. I have seen this happen many a time. Maybe you have had similar situations, and where rumors get started about a pastor. Dr. Howard was talking of earlier, and Pastor X, where people were saying that Dr. Howard had killed somebody. Are we investigating who's saying it? Why are they saying it? And if there's even a possibility for it to be true. To not receive an accusation unless there are 2 or 3 witnesses is the biblical model. And witnesses are held accountable if they bring false charges. Just as like in our litigious society today, there's not much accountability of bringing a false accusation. For instance, any woman here in town could say, I made inappropriate advances on them. And the rumor could get started, and then I'm done. I'm toast. Just the mere accusation is enough to ruin someone. And yet here in this canon, they're saying it's got to be investigated. It's got to be looked at, the character of the accuser and the validity of the accusation before, in this particular case, by this time in church history, there were entire courts that dealt with issues within the church that were presided over by godly men who made decisions on if charges are going to be brought up. If not civil lawsuits, these are ecclesiastical suits in which Christians are dealing with other Christians' issues within the body of the church to avoid going to the civil authorities, to avoid going to public court. And yet this is something that we have abandoned. Instead, today, many churches have members that are suing each other in civil court when it could be something that could be dealt with and brought to the pastor or the board, the plurality of elders to make a decision. But no, can't trust God to work in and through his people to decide these things. But these things in Canon 21 must be investigated. But that's not how our culture works, that's for sure. Canon 22, it's not lawful for a clergyman after the death of their bishop to seize what belongs to him, as has been forbidden by also the ancient canons. And those who do shall be in danger of degradation from their own rank. So we must step back for a moment and realize, when it's talking about clergymen, by this point in church history, in the previous about 100 years, so from 350, shortly after the Council of Nicaea, till 450, Council of Chalcedon, many other new positions apart from deacon and elder have been created. We have priests, we have monks, we have those that are now bishops over the elders. We have archbishops. We have all these other positions within the church that have been created in this 100-year time span. So when it's talking about clergymen, it's talking about the lower levels. It's talking about those that are monks or priests in the Roman Catholic sense of priests, those that dispense grace, those that hand out communion and transform it into the body. But that type of priesthood is being set up in this last century, in which then now there's this elevated level within the clergy of those that are bishops over the elders, and those that are then archbishops even over those. So it's saying here that if a bishop dies who's over multiple churches, it's not good for the clergymen, the lower levels, to basically steal their belongings, even though they had maybe taken a quote-unquote vow of poverty, that and maybe the items in which they belonged actually were purchased with monies given to the church. Like, for instance, some churches give pastors a certain amount in the budget to buy books for study. In fact, I have one such book right here, Evangelical Convictions. A book bought by the church for me to read and to study as a part of my transferring a license of an ordination over to the EFCA church. Now, if I were to die under this canon, Chris in the next town over from me shouldn't be stealing my copy of Evangelical Convictions, because it's been forbidden that it was given to Chris and belongs to this Chris, and then when he dies, it goes back to the church. So that if you're found guilty of this, that you're stripped of your rank, your position, you might be kicked out of the nunnery or the monastery, or you might be degraded from a priest down to a monk and serve in solitude somewhere. Once again, the unbiblical positions being introduced even at this early time in the church. It has come to the hearing of the Holy Synod that certain clergymen and monks, once again, unbiblical position, having no authority from their own bishop, and sometimes indeed while under sentence of excommunication by him, retake themselves to the imperial Constantinople and remain there for a long time, raising disturbances and troubling the ecclesiastical state. So in other words, someone's kicked out of the church. They go to the mother church, or maybe to the district or the denomination, to raise a ruckus. They're causing unrest. There are those that cause division, Romans chapter 10. And turning men's houses upside down, therefore the Holy Synod has determined that such persons shall first be notified by the advocate of the Most Holy Church of Constantinople to depart from the imperial city, and if they shall shamelessly continue in the same practices, that they shall be expelled by the same advocate, even against their will, and return to their places. So this advocate is, we could say, like a constable, that someone who is a judge, especially in older European systems of law and early American systems of law, that a judge or those that made decisions over a town or a council could appoint a constable, or we have a familiar thing that someone could be deputized in order to carry out the rule of law in that situation. So it's saying here that those that are expelled from the church for whatever reason, that they go to the denomination, they go to the association, they go to another church and raise a disturbance through this, someone can be deputized to take care of them and to kick them out and say, you know what, you guys are causing divisions, be gone. Which is smart, which is an appropriate action that needs to be made, because obviously biblical counsel was not accepted by them from the beginning from their own pastors. And now that they're thinking that they're somehow going to be heard, or a different decision is going to be then made by the district or by the association or by the denomination, not going to happen. That's their hope. But in the midst of their hope of doing this, they turn men's houses upside down. What is that talking about? That's talking about turning a husband and wife against each other in the decision of, well, was it right for the church to do this? Why did they do this? In fact, I've got a similar situation here in town. I've got somebody going door to door, airing the church's dirty laundry about a decision that the board made regarding a registered sex offender. And now he's going around and telling everybody about it. I need to track him down and approach him one by one and say, stop it. I need to deputize myself, so to speak, and to actually nail him down and confront him on this. And to be just as these deputies here and to expel them. That has not done the church one bit of favor. And has in fact turned men's houses upside down. To raising a disturbance, to them being quarrelers, causers of trouble, Romans 10. 24 is the last one we'll look at for today. Monasteries which have been once consecrated with the consent of the bishop shall remain monasteries forever, and the property belonging to them shall be preserved, and they shall never again become secular dwellings. And they who shall permit this to be done shall be liable to ecclesiastical penalties. What is this saying? Well, once again, in the time from the Council of Nicaea, 325, till here, 450, we see the introduction of monasteries, places in which people can live monastic lives and be taking care of their needs by the church, but to devote themselves to prayer or to fasting and to supposed spiritual disciplines. So we see the setting up these monasteries all over Europe and the Middle East. So it's saying that once the land's been purchased and these monasteries are set up, they should be monasteries forever. But a building, this is where a shift in understanding of the nature of the church. It talks about the ecclesiastical penalties, but obviously a shift has been turned in their understanding of what the ecclesia is, what the church is. The church is the people, not the steeple. I'll say it again. The church is the people, not the steeple. So in other words, just as even today we see this vast emphasis on the building over the people. Oh, we need to get more people into the building or into the church, even though they might be goats. That this focus and shift and change started well into the 4th century. That this change of, well, it's the building that is holy. It is the building that is the church. It is the edifice that is the spiritual, not the people that enter into it. And once the church made this departure down this road, it gets compounded over the centuries and millennia. To where the care and the upkeep of the buildings to the detriment of the people. To where it's this reverence over the building of God, over those that have the temple of God not made with hands inside of them. So these unbiblical positions of monks and monasteries and consecrating them and separating them. Yes, sure, if you have a church, pray for it. Pray that God would use it. But it's just a building. It could burn up at any moment, as we're seeing churches being burnt up all over the East Coast over civil unrest. Is that the church? No, the church is God's people. That is the ecclesia, not the building. Once again, we see very early a shift in direction. The addition of unbiblical positions, the shift in understanding biblical understanding of the ecclesia. We see a shift in the role and the purpose of deacons and elders and bishops, that it is forever changed. That then traditions come about, and time and entrenchment, to where, oh, heaven forbid the Roman Catholic Church would change their position on monasteries or nunneries or rectories, or their position on the building. The building's way more important than those that congregate in it. Because of this shift in theology, because of this shift in position over the millennia. We have to realize that it starts all the way back there, and that it affects things even till today. Yes, should we make the church look good? Well, as best as we can. Should we have pride in the gathering in which we associate ourselves in? Sure. But not to the detriment, or not to the currying favor with other people. Oh, wow, church down the street's got, a 60-inch big screen on either side to show the words, and we've only got a 20-inch. Whatever shall we do? That's not going to bring in the people. That type of thinking, that mentality starts here. No, they didn't have TVs in their day, but that heart, that mentality, that outward expression of theology starts here, and had already been present for about 100 years. We have to once again remember the underlying to all of these changes within the church post-Nicaea, post 311, and then the peace of the church. Sacralism, the marriage of the church and the government, had forever marked a change on the church. That once sacralism, the marrying of the church and the state, becomes so central, then there's this politics of, for instance, as I've mentioned before, Martin Luther, that the baptism rolls of the church were the tax rolls of the state. How dare you change baptism? Because how are we to know then who's been born in our town? Then how do we know how much to tax their parents? Sacralism. That is why some denominations have expressed freedom in being separate from a denomination or a government, to be able to separate themselves so that the baptism rolls of the church aren't the tax rolls of the state, so that they are able to worship freely. Hence, many of the Quakers coming from Europe at the beginning of our country to seek freedom in worship, because the Church of England is a sacral church. The state and the church are married at the hip. And at the time of the Council of Chalcedon, the empire and the church were married. These underline all of these canons when you're looking at the ecclesiastical penalties, that the state gives the church power in a court of their own law to determine penalties upon their people. Where's the church deriving its authority? From the state. Where's the church driving its power to create these monasteries and these new edifices and these new positions? Is it from Scripture? No. It's once again from their relationship with the state. Sacralism in church history is a huge issue. And I will continue to mention it time and time and time again. That sacralism was in many ways the death knell for the peace of the church. That those that then truly worshiped God in a way in which he desired became the outlaws. That became those like the Anabaptists of the Reformation period. That became those that were out in the wilderness, like John, outside of the state church's control. They're the ones that Martin Luther gave their third baptism. Those that were hung or burned at the stake in Geneva or Antwerp. Those that desired to serve God without the constraint of their conscience and the overlording of the sacral church. With that, next week we'll pick up the last 6 canons of the Council of Chalcedon and finish looking at this time of the Arian heresy to the end of the 4th century and its role in the course of church history from the 5th century even till now. How some of our very own heresies that have popped up have been because they are a resurfacing of the problems of a sacral church, of a non-biblical church, and of compromise and of heresy. With that, I pray that God would bless you, that he keep you, may he make his face shine upon you, and give you rest this week as we seek to serve him. Bye, y'all.